This is a story about a gamble. A gamble on a country's entire energy future, placed on a single floating power plant. It's about how a handful of officials in the Gambia burned through a fortune in public money, approaching $200 million, for a temporary fix to a permanent problem. We're going to show you exactly who they are, how they did it, and how one deal hobbled the nation's utility company for years. This isn't just about mismanagement. It's a cautionary tale of squandered resources and the staggering cost of bad decisions. How does a country spend the equivalent of building a brand new, modern power plant just to rent one? The answer is a tangled web of questionable deals, convenient contract extensions, and powerful figures who, so far, have escaped all accountability. But to understand how this floating behemoth even ended up in the port of Banjul, you first have to understand the desperation that opened the door for it. For years, the Gambia, a small West African nation, has been stuck with an unstable and inadequate power supply. For citizens and businesses, life was often dictated by the whims of the national grid. Blackouts weren't a rare inconvenience, they were a daily reality. The National Water and Electricity Company, NAWEC, was on its knees. With aging infrastructure and not enough generation capacity, it just couldn't keep up.
This energy crisis wasn't just an annoyance.
It stunted the economy, shuttered businesses, and hurt everything from healthcare to education. Hospitals were forced to rely on expensive backup generators, and kids struggled to study at night. The public was fed up, and the pressure on the newly elected government of President Adama Barrow, who took office in 2017, was immense. They needed a solution, and they needed it fast. The country was in a state of emergency, a power emergency. And when you're desperate, you're often willing to pay any price to see the light. This desperation set the stage for a deal that would, at first, seem like a miracle, but would soon reveal itself to be a financial nightmare. The government had to show it was doing something. Building a permanent power plant is slow, complex, and costs a lot of money up front. It takes planning, investment, and time. Three things the administration felt it didn't have. They wanted a quick fix, an immediate shot of megawatts into the failing grid. And in the world of emergency power, one name always pops up, offering a fast, if expensive, solution: Karpowership. This Turkish company runs a fleet of floating power plants, massive ships that can dock at a port, plug into the grid, and start generating electricity almost immediately. For a nation in crisis, it's a tempting offer. And in February 2018, that's exactly what happened. The Cardenese powership Korai Bay anchored in Banjul, ready to light up the Gambia. The arrival of the powership was celebrated as a huge breakthrough. Finally, a tangible sign of progress. The government had delivered. The initial deal was a 2-year contract signed between NAWEC and Karpowership for the ship to supply 30 megawatts of electricity. This was a major boost, covering nearly 40% of the country's power needs at the time. For many Gambians, the lights came on and stayed on more reliably than they had in years. On the surface, problem solved. But the key words in any emergency deal should be emergency and short term. This was supposed to be a bridge, a temporary measure to give NAWEC and the government the breathing room to build permanent national infrastructure. The initial 2-year contract seemed to fit that logic. It was a stopgap, a very, very expensive one. The cost was staggering, roughly $30 million a year. That's a $60 million bill for just the first 2 years. Let's pause and really think about that number. Now, the rule of thumb for building a new power plant varies, but a permanent thermal plant of a similar size costs roughly $1 to $2 million per megawatt to build. Even on the low end, that means you could build and own a permanent 30 megawatt power plant for about $30 million. You heard that right. In just 1 year, the Gambia paid Karpowership the full cost of building a brand new plant the nation would own forever. As economist Dr. Ismaila Gajigo put it, this is like renting a house for the same price it would cost to build it yourself, every single year. It's a financially disastrous deal by any logical measure. Yet, as the first 2-year contract neared its end in 2020, the predictable happened. No real progress had been made on building that permanent infrastructure. NAWEC was still struggling. So, the contract was extended for another 2 years. Another $60 million was on the line. Then, as 2022 rolled around, it happened again. Another extension, this time for 3 more years. What started as a 2-year emergency fix had ballooned into a 7-year dependency. The temporary solution had become a permanent problem. By the time the contract was finally ended, the Gambia had been renting this floating power plant for years. Let's do the math. At an annual cost of over $30 million, the total bill paid to Karpowership soared, a figure approaching $200 million. In the local currency, that's well over $10 billion, an almost unbelievable sum for a country of the Gambia's size. To really grasp the scale of this, think about what that money could have done. With that kind of cash, the Gambia could have built its own 200 megawatt power plant. That's nearly 7 times the capacity of the rented ship, and enough to have provided power to over 300,000 new homes. The money paid to rent a single ship could have moved the country toward true energy security and independence for a generation. Instead, that money is gone. It vanished into the accounts of a foreign company, and at the end of the deal, the Gambia was left with a pile of receipts. This deal didn't just represent a missed opportunity. It actively crippled the national utility it was meant to save. NAWEC was trapped. It was forced to buy expensive electricity from Karpowership, but its own finances were a mess. In a bizarre twist, NAWEC's customers are almost all on prepaid meters. They pay for electricity up front. Logically, that cash should have gone straight to suppliers like Karpowership, but the money wasn't making it. It turned out that government ministries were among the worst offenders, racking up huge unpaid bills that owed NAWEC a staggering $248 million by the end of 2022. The financial mismanagement inside NAWEC was rampant. Audited financial statements, a basic requirement for any major state-owned company, reportedly stopped being available after 2020. What little we can see from the last available audit in 2021 is shocking. Auditors found that revenues were understated by over $500 million, meaning the money was simply unaccounted for. They couldn't even reconcile bank records for 18 different accounts. Meanwhile, losses from foreign exchange spiraled as the Gambian dalasi fell against the US dollar, the currency Karpowership had to be paid in. This alone added hundreds of millions of dalasi to the debt. NAWEC was bleeding money, reporting a net loss of $1 billion in 1 year alone. Instead of a lifeline, the Karpowership deal became a millstone around NAWEC's neck. So who's responsible for what some have called the worst power purchase agreement in the history of energy transactions? The answer isn't one person, but a catastrophic failure of an entire chain of command, from the utilities management straight to the top of government. First, you have the management and board of NAWEC. They signed the initial deal and crucially approved the extensions that turned a short-term fix into a long-term disaster. They failed to manage the company's finances, letting it fall millions of dollars into debt to Karpowership. By late 2024, that debt stood at $8.4 million. Just a few months later, in early 2025, the finance minister claimed the arrears had somehow jumped to $19.6 million, saying it would be paid off with a World Bank loan. They were borrowing money just to pay the rent. But NAWEC didn't operate in a vacuum. It was overseen by the Ministry of Petroleum and Energy, led by Minister Nani Jawara, who used to be the managing director of NAWEC himself. He blamed the mounting debt on cash flow issues and the falling currency. This came after a reportedly competent NAWEC MD, Alpha Robinson, was removed and reassigned as an ambassador after closing loopholes that allegedly prevented kickbacks. A whistleblower has even alleged that Jawara and the president's chief of staff, Maud K. Cisse, then schemed to undermine the contract, possibly to insert kickbacks of their own. Then there's the Ministry of Finance, the gatekeeper of the nation's treasury. Year after year, this ministry allocated huge sums of public money to bail out NAWEC so it could pay Karpowership. In the 2025 budget alone, a transfer of $1.4 billion was set aside for this purpose. That single payment was more than the entire national budget for agriculture and more than double the budget for both the education and health sectors. While farmers struggled and hospitals lacked resources, billions were being burned on a floating power plant. And where were the oversight bodies? The Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, PURA, which is supposed to regulate NAWEC's contracts, seemingly rubber-stamped the deal and its extensions. The National Assembly's own Finance Committee appears to have done little to scrutinize the massive budget transfers. It was a complete institutional collapse. Every safeguard failed, allowing this deal to continue for years under President Adama Barrow's administration. In fact, it was only after a new NAWEC board, led by Dada Jawara Jr., presented an undeniable business case exposing the absurdity of the deal that its termination became unavoidable. The current NAWEC MD, Gallo Saidi, has since defended the contract's termination as a necessary step toward cheaper regional energy from sources like the OMVG interconnector. The contract is over. The ship has sailed. But the money, approaching $200 million, is gone forever. While the Gambia is now finally pivoting toward more sustainable energy solutions like solar power and regional imports, the question remains, why did it take so long and cost so much? The officials who signed, extended, and funded this disastrous deal remain in their positions of power. There have been no criminal probes, no special audits, and no one has been held accountable for this epic misuse of public funds. This isn't just a Gambian story. Allegations of corruption have followed Karpowership in other countries where they operate. It's a glaring example of what happens when governments choose short-term political wins over long-term national development. The people of the Gambia deserve answers. They deserve to know why their money was spent so recklessly. They deserve accountability. The only way that happens is if this story is heard. Share this. Talk about it. Demand that your representatives ask the hard questions and push for a full, independent audit of this entire deal. This was never just about a ship. It was about a choice. A choice between renting a temporary fix and owning a permanent future. Between political convenience and national investment. Between secrecy and transparency. For years, under the watch of the Adama Barrow administration, Gambian officials made the wrong choice again and again. The price tag was astronomical. The question now is, will anyone ever be held responsible for the bill?